Hey guys, it's me, Tikaani. And right now, on the official White House website, there is a page titled Criminal Aliens Receiving Medicaid. It shows mugshots, the country that these people are from, and the crimes that the administration claims that they committed. There is no evidence that they committed these crimes. They don't include names, which means you can't verify a single one of these charges yourself. And gee, I wonder why that is. At the top, a timer ticks upward with the words, Democrats have shut down the government for X amount of days, X amount of hours, X amount of minutes. This isn't a tabloid. It's not a parody. This is whitehouse.gov, the real government website. I want you to take a moment and let that sink in. This is the real government posting this. The real government blaming Democrats for the government being shut down. Never mind the fact freaking Republicans have the majority, but whatever. The place where Americans go to learn about their government is being used to spread fear and cause division among us. A government website is branding immigrants as criminals while blaming one political party for all of the chaos. And it's doing it under the tone of an educational webpage. And the irony? This same administration that claims to protect taxpayers is the one that slashed school lunches, the one that defunded childcare, and the ones that withholds resources from entire states because they didn't vote the right way. For example, Donald fucking Trump said if New York doesn't vote for his guy, he's gonna remove funding from New York. How can he even do that? They say, think of the children, but then they take away the children's food. And the truth is this page isn't actually about immigrants and crime or wanting to create a safer America. This page is strictly about distraction. It's meant to keep Americans fighting each other instead of noticing the corruption, the cruelty, and the policies that ruin us all. Because if you can convince people that someone else, someone poorer, someone darker, or someone undocumented is the enemy, you never have to answer for the harm you cause. So today, we're gonna break down that propaganda. We're going to look at how this webpage functions as propaganda, what lies it tells, the real lives it endangers, and we'll fact check the numbers of if immigrants are actually that much of a problem with crime. We'll discuss the families that are being scapegoated to justify this political hate, and we'll expose the hypocrisy of leaders who claim to uphold law and order while breaking both on a daily basis. This isn't just about immigration. It's about what happens when a government starts to use its own platform to divide people. And by the end, I don't want you to leave this video just angry, because you'll be angry, but I want you to leave this video ready. Ready to vote, ready to help, ready to talk, and ready to refuse to let this propaganda define what America is supposed to mean. We need to make America free again. Chapter 1, propaganda wearing a presidential seal. There's a reason that propaganda usually hides behind someone else's logo. It works best when it looks official. And this one isn't even hiding at all. It's sitting on the whitehouse.gov, the most recognizable web address in our country. The page is titled Criminal Aliens Receiving Medicaid. The header reads the White House. And then there's this huge countdown timer with big bold numbers ticking away. Democrats have shut down the government. The message is clear. Fear immigrants, blame Democrats, and trust the Republicans. Trust those in the office. Everything about this page's design mimics government neutrality, white backgrounds, serif fonts, links to policy pages, the presidential seal. But this tone is purely campaign rhetoric. It takes the tools of governance, the data, the list, the accountability, and turns them into weapons of perception. Now let's break that down. The first lie is in the title. Criminal aliens receiving Medicaid. It implies that undocumented immigrants are draining public money, but they can't. The federal law bars undocumented people from receiving Medicaid coverage. The only exception is emergency medical care. And that's because denying it would literally mean letting people die. We haven't even gotten to the part that immigrants are too afraid to even go to doctors because they're scared that doctors are going to expose them and get them deported. But sure, let's continue claiming that they use Medicaid. The headline doesn't expose abuse. It manufactures outrage. It frames basic human care as theft, then uses that myth to justify its cruelty. The second lie? It's in the photos. Every image is treated like evidence, every face arranged like proof. The page doesn't even list their names, only their country of origin, the crimes that they're accused of, and you know that's deliberate. Without names, no one can check to see if any of these cases are real, if the charges are exaggerated, or if these people even exist. I know this because I went to check their backgrounds and their actual crimes, but their names are unavailable. And when I screenshotted one photo and sent it to Google Images to see if I could find anything on that person, the only thing I found was that they are a doctor in the country of origin that the photo said that they were from. The only same person that lived in that country was a doctor. This is just propaganda. Propaganda depends on distance. It wants you to see these faces, but not see the people. It wants you to trust this accusation and never be able to confirm it. But there's no indication that these individuals even received Medicaid, besides the fact that it has a banner that says received Medicaid. There's no explanation to their circumstances, their sentences, or even their citizenship status. Just mugshots, stripped of humanity, recycled to fit a narrative. And this tactic isn't new. It's the same psychological trip used in wartime propaganda, pairing dehumanizing images with language that suggests moral decay. It turns empathy into suspicion. It makes viewers feel like defenders instead of participants in injustice. And the third lie. That third lie is the framing the White House as a messenger of moral order. When an official government website labels people as criminal aliens, it's not just reporting, it's rebranding. It's transforming the machinery of democracy into a billboard of fear. According to the American Immigration Council, immigrants are significantly less likely to be incarcerated than natural-born citizens. In one major study, about 1.6% of immigrant men aged 18 to 39 were incarcerated, compared to 3.3% of US-born men in the same age group. Isn't it strange that the biggest problem in America doesn't have evidence to back it up? Multiple studies, including research from the American Immigration Council, suggests that communities with higher immigrant population tend to experience equal or lower crime rates compared with similar areas with fewer immigrants. And none of that data appears on the page, because the truth doesn't serve the story that is being told. If the goal were safety, the site would talk about, I don't know, gun violence, corporate crime, or I don't know, government fraud. But this page isn't about public safety. It's about public perception. It's performance of control designed to make cruelty look like leadership. And the cost of that performance is a real thing. Howard Bailey, a Navy veteran, was deported to Jamaica in 2012 for a marijuana conviction from 1995. Then nearly 2 decades later, he was deported. He lost his home, he lost his family, all over this plant that was legalized in most states now. Yvonne Matamoros faces permanent separation from her US-born daughter because of a paperwork felony. She forged work documents to survive economically in a system that gave her no legal way to work. But if she didn't get that job, she's a bum, right? She came to the US as a child and later obtained a deferred action for childhood arrivals. She worked, she paid taxes, and she raised a family here. Her felony was using false papers to get a job in an economy in a country where a family cannot survive on only one income. For trying to get off of the government assistance and for trying to contribute to the American economy by getting a proper job and working, she faces deportation and permanent separation from her husband and her daughter, who is a US-born citizen. These are the people that are erased by this criminal alien label. Their stories exist in reports like the Immigrant Defense Project's Immigrant Stories, but never in the pages of this White House site. This page tells you who to hate. It tells you who deserves blame for your bills, your fears, and your country's dysfunction. And it does it in the same fonts used for official policy. Propaganda doesn't need to shout at you. Sometimes it just needs a seal, a certain font, and the confidence that no one will take the time to question it. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Fear. Fear doesn't just appear. It is built brick by brick, phrase by phrase, and the Criminal Aliens page is just one wall in a much larger construction project. Because on that very same page, there is a banner, a ticking government shutdown clock that reads, "Democrats have shut down the government for," followed by a timer counting upward in real time. Which is wild, considering the fact that Republicans have majority in both House and Senate. Republicans are the fucking president. How can Democrats be at fault when they are the ones that are outnumbered? The shutdown didn't stop them from enjoying the Great Gatsby party hosted by Trump at the White House. This banner is a marketing campaign designed to make outrage feel patriotic. Together, this page works like gears in the same machine. One tells you to fear, and the other tells you who to blame. The villain changes depending on what sells. Sometimes it's immigrants, sometimes it's Democrats, sometimes it's the mainstream media. But this message is always the same. Someone else is the problem. And that's how propaganda sustains itself. It doesn't need you to believe everything it says. It just needs you to stop trusting anyone else. Now let's talk about how fear spreads. When the White House publishes a list of criminal aliens and frames it as a public service announcement, that fear doesn't stay digital. It travels through social media, news cycles, and then to the dinner table conversations. It reinforces the same myths that make violence against immigrants possible. It says, immigrants are dangerous. They're stealing your tax money. They're the reason you can't afford groceries. And it works. Because fear is easier to sell than complexity. But if you talk to these families living under that fear, that story looks completely different. In a Kaiser Family Foundation study, many immigrants' parents and children live in daily fear of separation and detention. Immigrant parents describe keeping their children home from school after ICE raids. They stopped going to parks. They refuse to seek medical care even when their child is sick because they're terrified that the hospitals might report them as immigrants. One father said that he wakes up every day with the fear of being deported and separated from his family. Another mother said before there were many kids in the parks, but now the kids spend more time inside because we are afraid. These are the human consequences of this propaganda. They are not numbers. Their lives shrinking under anxiety. And the fear doesn't even end with those families. It affects everyone around them. Teachers, doctors, neighbors, they're all forced into silence or suspicion because the government tells them to see immigrants as threats and not as people. What's worse is how neatly this fear overlaps with economic manipulation. When people feel financially insecure, it's easy to convince them that their suffering has a face, and that their face looks a lot like the person cleaning their office, picking up their food, and driving their Uber. Meanwhile, the real causes of that suffering are corporate greed, tax cuts for billionaires, healthcare cuts. Those all stay behind the closed curtain, just out of view for those who aren't looking hard enough. The administration doesn't have to fix any of these problems. It just has to redirect your anger about them. That's what the government shutdown clock does. It turns systematic failure into a partisan blame game. It tells Americans that Democrats are starving them, when in reality, the people in power are cutting school lunches and childcare, then pointing to someone else while doing it. And somewhere between the criminal alien page and the shutdown clock banner is a dangerous illusion that's taking shape. A country that believes cruelty is strength. A government that believes division is order. A population that confuses manipulation with truth. These are the structural pillars of fear. It doesn't need to convince you that every lie is true. It just needs you to stop asking the questions. But if fear can be built brick by brick, it can be dismantled one truth at a time. Chapter 3, Hypocrisy and Power. Think of the kids. It's the line they love to use when they want to moralize themselves without actually doing anything. Every time someone questions cruelty, a deportation raid, a welfare cut, a ban, the administration answers with that same hollow phrase, think of the kids. But if they were thinking of the kids, they wouldn't be cutting funding to childcare while giving tax breaks to billionaires. If they were thinking of the kids, they wouldn't let classrooms and children go without lunches while their own children grow up in private schools with government paid security. They only think of the kids when it makes them look like saviors or when it's their kids. They don't think of our kids. And that is what makes the criminal alien page so twisted. It's pretending to protect families while making sure other families never see each other again. It's weaponizing the image of safety against the very people who need it the most. Let's be clear. Calling people criminal aliens isn't about crime. It's about control. If this were really about law and order, we'd be seeing another list. One with the names of politicians charged with corruptions, charged with sexual assault, election interference, and tax fraud. We'd see Donald Trump, the first US president ever convicted of felony crimes. One that our very own... What? Talking badly about the president might get me killed? Well, shit. I guess what I meant to say is release the Epstein files. But for now, we can talk about the members of Congress who mishandled classified documents, lied under oath, and accepted bribes. But there's no criminal politician page on the White House website. Only criminal aliens. And that's not justice. That's shaming. That's blaming. That's branding. It's the government saying that our crimes are power, while yours are sin. It's a moral double standard disguised as patriotism. And that's the same hypocrisy at the heart of every policy that punishes the poor while protecting the obscenely wealthy and powerful. They'll spend millions to persecute a mother for working under false documents, but ignore the corporations hiring her because that would mean losing donors. They'll raid families in the middle of the night, but they won't hold CEOs accountable for the wage theft that costs workers billions. It's a system that punishes desperation and rewards exploitation. It calls itself law and order, but it's just fear management. The American Immigration Council reported that immigrants are substantially less likely to commit crimes or be incarcerated than native-born citizens. Yet the government continues to equate immigration with danger. Why? Because it's profitable. It fuels detention contracts, it funds private prisons, and it helps with campaign donations. The more people that they label as criminals, the more power that they get to consolidate. Meanwhile, families like the Gutierrez family lived through this fallout. Oscar Gutierrez, a father of two, faces deportation over past DUIs despite being sober for years and caring for his sick wife and children. He's the breadwinner. He's not a threat. But the law doesn't see him that way because the system was never built to see him at all. And that blindness is deliberate. Because if people saw the truth, if they saw the same crimes committed by politicians that are forgiven while immigrants lose everything, they'd start asking dangerous questions. Questions like, who's really breaking the law here? Questions like, why are the rules always changing so the politicians can be above it? The criminal alien page wants you to believe that it's protecting Americans' moral core, but what it's really doing is proving how far that core has rotted. A country that excuses corruption at the top while villainizing the vulnerable has already lost its moral authority. So yes, let's think of the kids. Let's think of the kids who lost their lunches because of budget cuts. Let's think of the kids who watch their parents being taken away. Let's think of the kids who hide when they hear a knock at the door. Let's think of the kids who translate deportation notices for their parents because no one else will. Let's think of the kids who stopped going to school because it hurts too much to say goodbye in the morning. Let's think of the kids who sleep with their shoes on in case they have to run away. Let's think of the kids who've learned that silence keeps you safe and crying makes you a target. Let's think of the kids who don't dream about the future anymore. They dream of survival. Because if we don't start thinking for ourselves, those kids will inherit a country that confuses hate with policy and propaganda with truth. Chapter 4. The Cost of Dehumanization. There's a cost to this kind of messaging. You can measure it in fear, in silence, in the spaces left empty after a family is torn apart. You can measure it in the empty playgrounds where there were once children having so much fun living in this great land. The criminal aliens page makes it look simple. A face, a headline. But behind every label is a story, and behind every story is a person who no longer feels safe in a country that they call home. Take Howard Bailey, the Navy veteran. He was deported to Jamaica for a marijuana charge that was almost 2 decades old. He had a business, he had a family, and he had 2 children that watched their father disappear because a government that claimed to honor veterans decided some mistakes were unforgivable. His life was reduced to a single word, written on a little piece of paper: criminal. Or Lundy Coy, born in a refugee camp after her parents fled the Cambodian genocide. She came to the United States as a baby. She grew up here and made one mistake in college: a low-level drug possession, and she served 2 months in jail for it. She went back to school. She tried to rebuild her life, but that one charge made her deportable? Her entire future depends on a mercy that rarely comes from a government that doesn't give a shit about immigrants. They don't even give a shit about Americans. These people are not threats to America. They are proof of what America forgets when fear is profitable. According to the American Immigration Council, immigrants are half as likely to be incarcerated as native-born citizens. Research from the American Immigration Council and other studies suggests that cities and countries with higher immigrant populations tend to experience lower or equal crime rates. Yet none of that matters to the people that are writing these headlines, because facts don't sell as well as fear. This is what propaganda does best. It simplifies the complex, then sells the lie as common sense. It says they broke the law, but the law keeps changing depending on who's breaking it. It says they're so dangerous, but danger is just a label the government applies to whoever it needs you to hate that week. And the people living under those labels, those people pay a price. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that immigrant children now live with constant anxiety and fear. They refuse to go to school after seeing news about the ICE raids. Pediatricians call this toxic stress, the kind of trauma that reshapes a child's brain and body for life. That's the real outcome of law and order. Not safety, not patriotism, fear. And the fear spreads far beyond the families being targeted. It changes neighborhoods. It turns teachers into witnesses and doctors into bystanders. It silences people who know better because speaking up might put them in danger too. It's easy to call this politics, and it's harder to admit that it is cruelty with a public relations team. The Matamoros family knows that cruelty firsthand. Yvonne Matamoros came to the United States as a child, later obtained the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and has lived in the US for years. She worked, she paid taxes, and she raised a family. And her felony was using false papers to get a job. You know, to pay her bills, to work, probably desperately trying to get off the government assistance because our country hates when people that need it use it. For that alone, she faces deportation and permanent separation from her husband and her daughter, who is a US citizen. She paid taxes, contributed to her community, and raised a family for decades. And now, the crime that defines her in immigration court is from the same government that gave her no legal way to work. What all these stories share is not guilt. It is grief. Grief from times lost. Grief from families divided. Grief from dreams destroyed. And none of this makes the country safer. It only makes the country smaller, whiter. When the government uses its power to humiliate the powerless, it's not enforcing the law. It's teaching citizens to dehumanize each other. The lesson is already taking root. We see it in the comment sections, in the slogans at rallies, in the way people say illegals. Like the term means less than human. We see it every time a leader lies and someone cheers because that lie feels like belonging. But belonging built on cruelty is not unity. It is collapse in slow motion. The cost of dehumanization is not just paid by the families being targeted. It's paid by everyone who starts to believe that empathy is a weakness and silence is strength. Chapter 5. Breaking the spell. Propaganda works best when people stop questioning it. It tells you what to feel, who to hate, and what to fear until you start mistaking emotion for evidence. But once you see it for what it really is, that spell starts to break. That is why this moment matters, because every lie loses power. The second someone calls it by its real name. The second someone exposes the truth. The criminal aliens page and the shutdown clock were never about safety or policy. They were about distraction. They made us look sideways instead of upward. They made us fight over scraps, while billionaires and politicians quietly took more than any of us could even ever imagine. Then publicly, they threw a Great Gatsby party. They paved the White House gardens. They cut free school lunches, so children will literally starve. But don't worry, they thought about the kids. They just didn't actually care about them. And the way out of this is not more outrage. It's about understanding what this outrage costs. When people feel cornered, fear hardens into anger. That anger becomes an identity. And once someone's identity is built around anger, it's almost impossible to reach them with facts. This is how the movement built on cruelty continues to survive. They turn that emotion into an armor. So we have to do something harder. We have to meet that manipulation with empathy. That doesn't mean excusing it. It means refusing to let it turn us into what it wants us to be. It's easy to see how this happens. Take a topic like trans rights. Someone who's never thought about it deeply might hear the word transgender and feel confused, uncomfortable, maybe even defensive. They've been told it's a threat to everything they've understood about gender identity, to everything they understand about their own identity. Then they make an ignorant comment, not out of malice, but out of fear, out of what they've been told. And what happens after that decides what direction that they'll go. If they're met with mockery or rage, they retreat to the people who will accept their ignorance as belonging. And those people are usually waiting on the far right. But if they're met with questions, patience, and clarity, why does this make you feel uncomfortable? Do you know anyone that's actually transgender? Here's what this experience actually looks like. Something different can happen. They might start to listen. This doesn't mean excusing their bigotry. It means refusing to hand it a home. The right laughs off empathy because they've learned that cruelty wins an applause. But the left sometimes burns out on its own moral fire. So angry at injustice that we forget how persuasion works. Anger can expose harm, but empathy can undo it. When someone repeats propaganda, meet them with questions. Don't insult them. When someone misunderstands, explain to them with patience. When someone is angry, stay calm. You can't shame a person out of a lie, but you can invite them out of it. Because shame drives people to the same place propaganda does: isolation. They stay in their little echo chamber, where the control thrives. The truth is that most people want to feel safe, and propaganda sells them the illusion of that safety by convincing them that someone else has to lose theirs for them to remain safe. It tells them that security only exists if someone else is suffering. And that lie only survives if we let it. We can choose something else. We can volunteer. We can donate. We can vote for leaders who build safety through compassion instead of punishment. We can support organizations like the Immigrant Defense Project, the Kaiser Family Foundation, and the American Immigration Council that fights for facts, justice, and human dignity. Empathy is not a weakness. It's a rebellion in a culture that profits from hate. Compassion is not naivety. It's what keeps the truth alive when fear becomes policy. The system counts on us to look away, to get tired, to stop caring. But the second we choose to keep looking, to keep caring, to keep acting, the system starts to break. Propaganda can only survive in silence. So speak, vote, help. And remember that democracy is not something the government gives us. It is something we have to protect from it. So here we are, an official website labeling human beings as criminal aliens, a propaganda campaign, a country told to hate the very people who built its homes, picks its food, and raises its children. That's not leadership. And it is happening under the same seal that once stood for freedom. But propaganda only wins when people believe it is too big to challenge. And it's not. It is fragile. No matter the size, it is fragile, and we can come at it. We can destroy it. It depends on our silence, our exhaustion, and our willingness to look away. And we do not need to accept that. We can look directly at that cruelty and still choose compassion. We can expose every lie it tells and still believe in what the country could be. We can keep our anger sharp, but not let it turn us cruel. Because cruelty is the real wall they want to build. The one that keeps us from recognizing each other's humanity. So yes, be angry, but be informed. Be loud, but be kind. And when the government tries to turn neighbors into enemies, remember this. The strongest form of resistance is empathy that refuses to die. Bye, guys.